We had some interns that played Nintendo through a sheep's brain. We did a few tests where we passed natural language and text through a sheep's brain to sort of benchmark how quickly we could send communication through them. And more rigorously, we did a test of the information transfer rate of the system and determined that one of our cortical modules can transfer 200 bits per second, which is the highest data rate brain-computer interface in the world. And it happens to be about 20 times faster than Neuralink. We and others will develop visual prostheses for people who are blind to restore vision. When vision restoration reaches 20/20 vision, then a BCI-provided image will be indistinguishable from one that was delivered by the eye. And at that point, you have the ultimate AR/VR experience. People often have their intuition for what is invasive and what is not invasive in medicine can be wrong. So, for instance, getting a brain implant sounds very scary, but taking a pill doesn't. But I'll tell you that, if you have two options and one of them is being on strong opiates for a long time, and the other one is getting a deep brain stimulator, I think that empirically, strong opiates are more invasive.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. I have a very special guest and topic today, brain-computer interface. Oh, my God. My guest is Dr. Matt Engel. He's the founder and CEO of Paradromics, a neurotechnology leader developing the world's most advanced and clinically viable brain-computer interface that has an acronym BCI platform, bridging human thought and digital capability. Paradromics' BCI platform records brain activity with unmatched precision, capturing data at the level of individual neurons. I presume these are not monkey brains you're doing here.
Yeah, we actually...
Well, maybe you did initially. Let me finish giving you the proper introduction now. This advanced technology enables the decoding of vast amounts of brain data, opening the door to next-generation treatments for paralysis, chronic pain, addiction, mental health conditions, and more. With the power of AI, this platform has the potential to radically shift how healthcare providers approach some of the most challenging medical conditions. Dr. Engel earned his PhD in neuroscience from the University of Heidelberg, followed by postdoctoral research at Stanford University. Paradromics engineered its first clinical product, the Connexus BCI, received 2 FDA breakthrough device designations, and performed the first in-human neural recording this last May 2025. Cool. The company is now preparing to launch a clinical trial in early 2026, pending regulatory approval. Matt, nice to see you. Thanks for coming on. What an amazing project you have going here.
Yeah, thank you for
give us a
having
little bit
me.
of background. How'd you get into neuroscience, and then what took you into actual practical applications here?
So I did my PhD in neuroscience. I was working in an olfaction lab, the science of smell. But I think really, really early on in my academic journey, it occurred to me that my interest wasn't so much in investigating the basic mechanisms of science or understanding how things worked, but in developing tools that researchers could use that would allow them to answer new questions that they couldn't before. And so that kind of interest brought me into the field of new electrode designs, and I did a postdoc at Stanford Material Science and Engineering, and I was working on ways to engineer interfaces between even electrodes and single cells. But I had this project that was also focused on scaling up neural recording. How could you talk to as many neurons as possible at once? And in the basic research realm, that's interesting because that's how brains encode information. Neurons are slow. So I give you... we all are familiar with gigahertz processors, like the chips in our computers operate at gigahertz speeds. They do billions of things per second. But a neuron is 1,000,000 times slower than that. From a neuron's standpoint, if 2 things happen within a millisecond, they happen simultaneously. And so the neuron is very, very slow. And as a result, to get a lot of information in or out of the brain, there's no high-speed serial port that you can plug into. You have to talk to a lot of neurons simultaneously. And it was this process of thinking through what kind of technologies do we have that could talk to a lot of neurons at once that brought me to the technology that became Paradromics. And at that same time, there were researchers across the country that were working in the clinic with old BCI platforms that were allowing people to control robotic hands, control cursors on screens with a fraction of the data that these new technologies that we were contemplating could provide. And it was conversations with these clinical researchers that led me to think, hey, if instead of just developing these tools for basic research, we actually brought high data rate brain-computer interfaces into the clinic, then we could change the kinds of things that were available to people with disabilities. We could change the kinds of conditions that we could treat. And so that was kind of the genesis of Paradromics.
And then when did you found the company, and how do you do that? How do you found a company like that?
So we started in 2015. This was the peak of the Obama Brain Initiative, and there was money to be had for developing new neurotechnologies. So we started the company so that we could accept, an $800,000 NIH grant. And then we were able to round up some angel funding. And at the time, honestly, I would compare us to what is now called a focused research organization. It would be hard to call us a company in 2015, but we won in 2017 a competitive contract from the Department of Defense to build out next generation BCI technology. It was their neural engineering system design program. I think there were 6 teams that won money from that. 5 of them were top universities, and one of them was this group of weird kids operating out of garage space in East San Jose. And that was us. But in the end, from the program, we were definitely the most successful project to come out of it, and we became, a clinically viable therapy that we're kind of bring to market now. So, it was really like probably around 2018, 2019 when we moved from Bay Area to Austin and set up shop here, and I met my chief operating officer, James Burrows, and we started building out the medical device side of the team that we really became a company in earnest.
Yeah, that's interesting. What would the Department of Defense, or I guess now Department of War, want with this technology? What are they thinking? Just treating wounded soldiers or making better soldiers, or what?
They were early backers of BCI technology. And our program, for instance, was for restoration of function after injury. So you can build a really nice upper arm prosthetic, but without an advanced BCI, you can't control it. We have high data rate cameras, but without a high data rate BCI, you can't connect them to the brain. And so there was this, recognition that on the technology end, we have amazing capabilities, but we can't leverage them to help people because the data connection between technology and the human brain is just too sparse right now.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So the problem is data upload from the brain has been too slow.
And download.
And now we're finally getting the technology to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to some basics. Just walk us through, how do neurons work, and where do thoughts come from? And so I think a thought like, I want to move my arm, but there's a break in there from, paralysis from an injury or a stroke or whatever, and the signal is just getting blocked. So, what, I guess, can't you reroute it, or how do you think about that?
So the way that individual neurons work, which is they essentially, one neuron connects to 10,000 other neurons. And so it's this massively parallel architecture where a neuron is listening to 10,000 of its neighbors and getting inputs. And when it receives enough excitation from a combination of its neighbors, it undergoes this binary event called an action potential, where it fires off a signal to all of its friends. And so the brain is this amazing emergent network of very, very simple neurons that essentially they're waiting, they're listening, they're integrating, and then they fire an event, and that event propagates to all of their friends. And so you have just this these waves of activity that propagate through the brain that constitute our entire lived experience, whether it's sensory input to the brain or motor output out of the brain or cognition in between. Everything, the substrate of neural activity, is the firing of individual neurons' action potentials. And how that relates to brain-computer interfaces is that if you can read out the firing of action potentials in a population of neurons, then you effectively have a description of what is being computed and what that network is doing. If you go into an area of motor cortex that is no longer connected to the body due to a neurodegenerative condition like ALS or spinal cord injury, you can still listen to what's happening in that part of the brain when someone attempts an action. So even if you can't speak anymore. When you try to speak, those neurons will be active. And so what you could do is, for someone who can't speak anymore, you can set them up in a sort of rehab setting where on a screen, they see a target sentence, they try to say it. Nothing happens. They see a new target sentence, they try to say it. Nothing happens. After attempting to say a few different target sentences, a decoder, which is essentially a piece of machine learning code that maps neural activity to the target sentences that were attempted, you can build a decoder that can predict what someone was trying to say based only on their brain activity. And once that's working, now they can use that in open loop and they can start communicating, and then they can learn to use that system better. And so that's happening right now at places like Stanford and UC Davis. People have brain-computer interfaces that can read out people's neural activity at the individual neuron level and map it onto language.
That is amazing. Gosh. So, someone has a stroke and they can no longer speak. So that would be like, I don't know, in Broca's area, I always forget who's doing what there. But you could then put your chip, and your chip is maybe the size of, I don't know, 10 millimeters or something like that.
Yeah, it's about 10 millimeters in diameter. And so it sits on the top of the brain, and then it has these tiny little hair-like electrodes. They're actually smaller than a human hair. They're made of platinum iridium, and then they insert down into the surface of the brain, and they record from neurons at a depth of about 1.5 millimeters.
Wow. So how do you get in there? I mean, this is brain surgery, right? You got to go cut through the skull and the whole thing, and then we're just saying, we'll just do this. I mean, that's like a major surgery.
It is, and also it's a safe surgery. So, I mean, it's not something you would trivialize, but people get surgeries like this when they have essential tremor or Parkinson's, and they receive what's called a deep brain stimulator. If you have epilepsy, you may have a piece of your skull removed, and you have electrodes placed on the surface of your brain to try to localize the center of the epilepsy to see if you'd be a candidate for surgery. These kinds of procedures are performed all the time, and as long as it's done in a safe way by a responsible neurosurgeon, the outcomes are really good.
And so when they close the brain back up, that doesn't change things forever? I mean, you don't have to keep taking anti-epileptic drugs or anything like that, seizure drugs, or?
No, I mean, you'll probably take an antibiotic and maybe some anti-inflammatories for the couple weeks after the surgery, but it's not something you have to be on continuous meds for.
Well, I only asked because my mom had 5 craniometries for a meningioma brain tumors.
Oh, yeah.
That ultimately killed her after about a decade. Yeah, it was a pretty big deal, but they're carving out huge portions of tumors and stuff. It was a pretty massive area.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because sometimes people will cite these brain surgery statistics that actually pool data between these relatively innocuous procedures like a deep brain stimulator or epilepsy monitoring with major brain surgeries where you could even have like a lobectomy. And, it's important whenever I'm thinking about, the surgery that we're performing, I'm comparing it to the next closest major procedure, which is either DBS or epilepsy monitoring. But if you just go and you Google or you use ChatGPT or something like that and try to find statistics on intracranial surgeries, it's often pooling over cancer treatments and sort of like large epilepsy surgeries. So it's an important distinction for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so you got this tiny little 10 millimeter with the 400 something wires. How do you know which neurons or which neural network area or whatever module you're going to stick it there on the motor cortex? What if it's 10 millimeters to the right or left? It should have been. How do you know exactly where to go?
So there's anatomical organization which sort of maps what areas of the body are controlled by what parts of motor cortex, and they're fairly well conserved. So by and large, a neurosurgeon just looking at the surface of the brain would know. For the early feasibility studies coming into this, because we want every single trial to have the most information possible, we're also doing functional imaging, where someone will get an fMRI beforehand, which is able to localize brain activity through medical imaging. So someone will attempt a task like speaking, and then you'll see what areas of the brain light up when they're speaking. And we can use that, we can lay that over the anatomy and make sure that we're going into the exactly right location. Now, targeting in brain-computer interfaces, it's not a neuron-to-neuron target. It's really like a millimeter scale targeting to get in the right area. And then the decoding algorithm is akin to, okay, now we've dropped microphones into this crowded stadium, and now we need to figure out like which speaker is who and how to map that activity onto the desired outcome. And so we never know a priori when we drop down which neurons we'll be listening to, but that's the job of the machine learning algorithm, is to provide that alignment.
Oh, wow. And so even if you're off a little bit, could the patient then learn to reprogram those neurons to do the job?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, there's a really interesting story about, this is not a person, but this is a monkey. It was at the University of Pittsburgh that was when they went to finally look and see like exactly where the device was, like for at the end of the study, they found that the surgeon had misplaced it, and instead of putting it in motor cortex, they had put it in the somatosensory cortex. But even with the device located in the touch area of the brain instead of the motor area of the brain, the monkey still learned to volitionally control it and was performing at levels that was the same as all of its friends. And so the brain is remarkably plastic, and we're very good learners. And so even if things were placed in the totally wrong area of the brain, you could likely still use it. There's also work on, there was a patient that was treated at Stanford that received a device in the area of his brain that controls the hand. That in between sessions where they were doing hand-based decoding, they were talking to him, and they noticed that they're looking at the kind of neural activity on the screens, and when he's talking, the neurons are lighting up, and they actually figured out that they could decode speech from the hand area of the brain. It wasn't as good as if you go into the speech area of the brain, but even just the coupling between the hand and mouth areas, because we do so many things that require coordination, that coupling is so good that you can even do speech decoding in the hand area of the brain.
That's amazing. Wow. Could you do it while the patient is awake? I mean, you do the surgery, wake them up, and then go, okay, we're going to poke around here and then see what the response is?
You could do it, and for certain brain surgeries, that's what they do. Before they cut anything out, they always want to make sure exactly what it does. But in these sorts of BCI recording surgeries, it's usually the case that they're anesthetized, and you already have enough fiducials and you know where you're going that you just place the device once.
Right. Okay, so let's look at some of these different medical problems. So, I mean, these are fairly substantial. If you added them all up, all the people who are paralyzed, they're either quadriplegic or paraplegic, all the people that have chronic pain, addiction, I don't know if you could deal with Alzheimer's, but certainly Parkinson's and stuff. I mean, it must be millions of people.
It is. It's billions of people. And I think one of the sort of education points that I have around BCI is that a lot of people understand, prosthetics like Robocop, control robotic body, get robotic eyes, that makes sense. But a lot of the big wins, in healthcare and commercially from BCI will be reading cognitive and mood states. So think about like if you go into the doctor, a simple question like, how much pain are you feeling? 1 to 10. Everyone hates that question. No one knows how to report it. And like if you ask my Nana about how much pain she was recording, she could have a compound fracture. She'd tell you it too. And then I also have friends that they're just feel like their pain levels after a hard day at work is like an 11. And so it's hard to normalize. And how do you decide who should be on opiates in an environment like that? And
right.
So, one of the things that I'm really excited about for BCI is it can read out things like mood, pain, cognitive states, and then imagine instead of having to just go into a psychiatrist's office or a neurologist's office and fill out a checklist, it had just an objective readout of what was going on in your brain, and it could tell you, this drug is working for you, this drug is not working for you. You could have a phone app that says, in the next 20 minutes, take 1 small blue pill and 1 large red pill. It would really transform how people treat mental health in the same way that continuous glucose monitors change the way that people treat diabetes, even though all it does is measure.
Right, because before you have this, all you have is subjective perceptions of what the person's feeling. It's the mind, the other mind problem, right? How do I know what kind of pain you're in? And so you just have to it's like happiness research. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Well, what time of day is it?
Yeah.
What happened yesterday? It's all just so
and it's
subjective.
the time course. If you're trying to control a neurostimulator device, you can't ask the questions fast enough. What you want is low latency, real-time readout that can tell you if you need to take medication or can directly control stimulation of like deep brain areas.
Yeah. So I was an undergraduate at Pepperdine University, and there I had a girlfriend named Maureen Hannon from Alaska. She doesn't mind me telling this story because I've told it before, but after we graduated, maybe 2 years after that, she got in a car accident and broke her back. And so she was out in the middle of nowhere. It took forever to get her to the Long Beach emergency room there, and they put her in an oxygen tank and all this stuff. And anyway, I was there for months. Every day it was horrible, and she is to this day still paralyzed. She's still a paraplegic. She got married, had kids, the whole thing. Led a normal life. Played tennis as a paraplegic tennis and so on. But at the time, I joined the Cure Paralysis Foundation, and I started doing long bike rides to raise money for them. That's how I got into long distance cycling. Anyway. And at the time, it was kind of exciting. Like, yeah, there's some big breakthroughs. And then, decade after decade would go by. This was 1980. And I thought, oh, by the 90s, they'll have this done. I thought, okay, by the 2000s, for sure, they'll have this. And it's been so discouraging. But I'm feeling like now, finally, it's the technology's getting there where somebody who's a paraplegic or even a quadriplegic, I guess, just depends on how bad the break is, where you could just, I don't know what you would do. How would you treat that?
Well, I think one of the critical things that's happened, at least in the BCI industry, is recognizing that science is hard. To be able to regrow neurons, and truly cure paralysis may be a generational project. Like the molecular biology, the cellular biology, even just like the scaffolding to support new axon growth, it's really, really hard. And it could be multiple Nobel Prizes before we get there. We all hope for it. We want to fund it. We want to we want to champion it, but we also know that no one's fundamentally in control of when a new discovery happens. And so the BCI, mindset is that while we're working on all of those things, there's certain things we actually do understand well already. We understand motor representations in the brain well enough to know what someone's trying to do. We can get out those signals and give them to a computer where suddenly engineering in like the world of computers and robotics is much, much easier than basic science discovery and biology. And so the idea is, well, we can't allow you to speak again with your vocal cords and your lungs, but we can connect your brain to a computer and it can speak for you. And I think for paralysis related to movement, whether it's paraplegia and initially it'll just be controlling a wheelchair, but later it'll be we have exoskeletons. Like there are exoskeletons that can allow someone to walk. And it's really just a matter now, I would argue, of how embodied that control is, ranging from least embodied. We could build an exoskeleton to get today that would allow someone to walk at least as well as the best humanoid robots. And you would just talk to it and you would say, okay, take me up those stairs. But it wouldn't be very embodied because you wouldn't have a direct link between your motor cortex to that thing. So it wouldn't feel like you're moving. It would feel like it's moving you. If you have high data rate brain-computer interface to it, then you could control it in a naturalistic way where you would try to move your leg and it would do the thing that you were trying to do. And so I'm really bullish about our ability to connect brains to technology systems where the technology systems can iterate really quickly and can be engineered and can move at the speed of technology. And then our only goal at that point is to get the data out as quickly as possible.
Okay, so here's another basic question. Let's say you got your spine and there's a break in the spine there.
Mm-hmm.
So why couldn't you take like just some wires from the upper part and reroute them down to this part and just skip the broken part? I don't know. I'm saying it like it's an easy thing.
I mean, that's
you know,
been
must
a
be.
proposal for a long time, and there's
Yeah.
excitement about doing that, but it's not clear that the downstream neural elements that are controlling movement are actually, intact and ready to be reactivated. Activating, a dense fiber tract is different than activating like a distributed population of neurons, like in cortex. It just hasn't been done yet, and involves more, let's say, like squishiness than activating a robot. So I think that probably happens. Something like what you just described will probably happen before the full-grown cell biology regrowth of a functional spinal cord. But I think it involves more biology risk and more basic understanding to be developed than a purely neural engineering approach.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're really different kinds of problems. Like, why don't neurons regrow? Well, they just don't. I mean, salamanders can grow new limbs. How come humans can't? Well, I don't know if you could solve that problem. That's a different kind of problem.
Yeah, I think the thing is that first, to solve the problem, you have to even understand the problem well enough to pose the question. And where we are right now, the state of affairs is we have to ask a lot of even more basic questions to understand what is the difference between cutting off a salamander's leg and cutting off my leg. Like, why does developmental biology in complex mammals differ so much from in simple animals? Like, why do you lose that plasticity over time? Is it something fundamental? Is it something we could re-engineer? Like, these are amazing questions, but it could just, like, to go from where we are to salamander people who regrow legs and arms is like multiple Nobel Prizes, of which you're really not in control of the timing.
Is there any research with stem cells and treating things like Parkinson's?
Yes, there's specifically, I think, hope for Parkinson's disease because it involves loss of a specific type of neuron, dopaminergic neurons in a specific area, that there's a lot of hope within the community that you could regrow that one neuron type in that one area. And in Parkinson's disease, it's really like a dose-dependent effect as you're losing those neurons. The pathology of the Parkinson's disease. So I think that is one place where people are very bullish about a stem cell-based therapy. But I would still say that it doesn't exist yet. And so, for people who are living with Parkinson's or essential tremor today, there's still a really strong reason to say, get a DBS now, use the therapies that are available now, and then be the first person to sign up when the cell-based therapy is available.
Yeah. But I mean, you're probably the two biggest bins of problems would be chronic pain. There's millions of people. I mean, we just had the epidemic of addiction with that, not good. And then mental health, really depression. I mean, depression is a huge problem. Or anxiety and depression, bipolar, that kind of stuff.
Post-traumatic
we use these
disorder,
words. Yeah, PTSD. Yeah, right. So. But first, you really have to figure out what's going on there. I mean, depression, okay, but what level does it become a brain chemistry problem versus I just feel kind of blue today because, I don't know, had a fight with my spouse or something like that?
Yeah, they're functional categories, and just like so many of these conditions exist on a spectrum, and like it may be multiple etiologies, many underlying biologies that are grouped into attention deficit disorder or grouped into depression. And so one of the things that bringing high data with brain computer interfaces into this space will just sort of shine a light into these conditions so that you can start to develop like sophisticated ways of phenotyping people, putting them in subclasses, and understanding like who's likely to respond to what therapies.
Right, yeah, because there's all that controversy over SSRIs and do they work, do they not work? It depends. How bad's the depression? Which populations are trying it? This has been going on for decades. Yeah. And, apparently if you have really severe depression, I mean, like you can't get out of bed, go to work, it works for that, but, less, it's harder to see the progress. So, what you're proposing is to really kind of do an end run around that, or at least target it. for exactly what you need.
I think there's so many methods of modulating brain states right now that are out there. But the fact is that we don't have sophisticated ways of knowing how they're working. And so it just becomes like dealer's choice, or like whatever the doctor you see kind of looks and says, I don't know, I kind of feel like you might be getting this. And then you'll go on to, especially like an SSRI, you have to be on it for a few weeks before they're even willing to say whether it's doing anything. And then you need a few weeks to wane off of it and suffer the side effects. And so you have these kind of the sort of long time course of effects and side effects. And then, okay, that didn't work, try the next one. And even the process itself is kind of depressing and demoralizing to someone who's trying to find a therapy and has to cycle on and off several drugs.
Yeah. On the chronic pain, a lot of the stories coming out of the opioid crisis were, people that hurt their knee in a football game or bash their toe on the job or whatever, and the doc just gives them this opioid for the general pain. Why can't they target the pain pathway from the toe or the knee or whatever and say, we want to stop that signal right there, not the whole brain where you get addicted?
Yeah, and I mean that kind of thing is on the table when you start talking about really specific interactions with the brain through high data rate interfaces. I mean, the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is important to say, is that people often have their intuition for what is invasive and what is not invasive in medicine can be wrong. So, for instance, getting a brain implant sounds very scary, but taking a pill doesn't. But I'll tell you that, like, if you have two options and one of them is being on strong opiates for a long time, and the other one is getting like a deep brain stimulator, I think that like empirically, strong opiates are more invasive. So it's important to think about it in a kind of sophisticated way.
Yeah. Okay, so your company makes the little interface chip that you put in the brain. Where does the data go into? You must also develop software programs for computers. And what kind of computers do you use? What's on the other end?
So we have the brain implant. There's a wire that comes under the skin down to the chest. And then we have sort of like, it looks a lot like a pacemaker. It sits under the skin in the chest. It's a powered data system. It's charged inductively like an electric toothbrush, and it sends the data out using an infrared link. It's actually the same kind of infrared networking infrastructure that's used for optical networking. It's just your skin is the fiber optic. And then we have a device that sits on the outside, which looks a little bit like Iron Man. It's an external device about this big, has a light on it, and it transmits to a off-the-shelf NVIDIA product. And then all of the compute happens outside of the body. And that's a deliberate architectural decision because the outside of the body, you can change things really quickly. You can always make it smaller, always make it better. You can move a lot faster. And so that allows for the part that's inside doesn't have to change that much and is its goal is just to dump the data out into the processor.
And then what is the processor doing? What kind of programs do you have to write to process that?
The first system is for speech decoding. It takes there's a rehab training program where there are target sentences on a screen, and the person who can no longer speak looks at the sentence, tries to say the sentence. After repeatedly trying to say sentences, there's a machine learning algorithm that maps the neural activity onto the intended sentence. And then once that's running, it's running in its inference mode. Every time a person tries to say something, it produces text on the screen. And then turning the text into speech in the participant's voice is as easy as pressing play. And since most people in the modern era have at least a few recordings of themselves, you can voice clone them. And then when they read it, it could read it with emphasis in their own voice.
God, that's amazing. Okay. How big a company is your company, Paradromics?
We are 75 people now, mostly in Austin.
Okay.
We also have a data science group in Berkeley.
And so, do you actually see patients, or is it still kind of experimental and they have to sign waivers or whatever to try different things?
Our first clinical trial is in Q1 of next year. So we'll be,
what is it?
It's for people getting devices and speaking again.
Oh, for the speech thing. Yeah. Okay.
And
All
so
right,
right now, all of our patients are sheep.
They're sheep.
And so right now
That's
we're
funny.
doing all of our testing, safety testing, speed testing, longevity testing in sheep.
Okay, and you monitor how they go bah,
Well,
and what it means.
the great thing about working in the speech space is that there are already clinical trials at like Stanford and UC Davis where people are using older devices to help people speak. And so we know what kind of signals they're recording. So all we have to show in our preclinical studies is that we can get those same kinds of signals from mainly single cell action potentials from cortical areas in a large animal. So we built this test bed, which is recording in sheep primary auditory cortex. So the way we test our device is we have sheep that have a device in their primary auditory cortex, and then we play really complex sounds to the sheep, and then we can decode exactly what they're hearing based on the brain implant. But it's also, we can have fun with it because we can also send sort of any signal can be encoded as sound and passed into the sheep's brain and decoded out the other end. So we had some interns that played Nintendo through a sheep's brain. We did a few tests where we passed natural language and text through a sheep's brain to sort of benchmark how quickly we could send communication through them. And like more rigorously, we did a test of the information transfer rate of the system and determined that like one of our cortical modules can transfer 200 bits per second, which is the highest data rate brain-computer interface in the world, and it happens to be about 20 times faster than Neuralink.
Wow. Okay. Neuralink. Okay. That's probably what the company most people are familiar with because of Elon. But how many of you are there? Like how many startups and companies like this are there working on the problem?
There are about a handful of us, but there are only two high data rate brain-computer interfaces, and that's us and Neuralink. Everyone else is working on kind of various aspects of this, or they have different theses about, building a wearable device that has less data but doesn't require surgery, building an endovascular device that has less data but is used as a blood vessel instead of a cranial. There are different approaches, but where we think the field is going long term is all bottlenecked by data. And so I see the brain-computer interface field developing like other more classic semiconductor fields have. You think about early Intel and how processors were getting better every 2 years. Think about NVIDIA today, where GPUs get better, the cost of compute comes down, and what you can do expands. Even if you think of it, in some sense, the early internet was gated by early internet hardware. Netflix existed for 10 years as a company that mailed people DVDs in the mail. And then in 2010, enough people had enough download speed that they pivoted to a streaming service and became the company they are today. And so, the history of the internet is just this perfect analog of devices get better, speeds get better, and the whole
Moore's
ecosystem changes. Yeah, Moore's Law, exactly.
Yeah. And you're seeing that in your area as well.
100%, yeah. And
amazing.
Our goal as a company is to continuously unlock, new applications and new performance levels for BCI.
All right, let's carry this out a few years. Can you imagine either your company or maybe you're contracted with a medical hospital or whatever center in which whatever the person walks in with, I have chronic pain or I have severe depression or whatever. Okay, we're going to scan your brain. We're going to do this. We're going to put these little chips in here. We know exactly what to do. So it would become just kind of a clinical practice.
Oh, absolutely. That's where it's going. Yeah.
How long?
We're looking at we're aiming for commercial approval in 2030. So, the first applications, the first people walking in with conditions and getting prescribed devices will be in the 2030s. And then it's just, expanding from there. Our goal is not only running our own clinical trials, but to get devices out to the leading clinical researchers in the field and have them run academic trials and essentially just continuously find new applications and new things and people that can help with the devices.
Yeah. Okay, so if we carry out Moore's law, and so you have your little 10 millimeter device, what if it was 100 millimeters and it plopped it on the whole cortex, and you had, I don't know, 1,000,000 bits per second or something that you could process it? At some point, would you know what I'm dreaming or what I'm thinking? Or and let's go full sci-fi.
What's going to
Black
happen?
Mirror.
Yeah, I mean, what will happen is that we and others will develop visual prostheses for people who are blind to restore vision. When vision restoration reaches 20/20 vision, then a BCI-provided image will be indistinguishable from one that was delivered by the eye. And at that point, you have the ultimate AR VR experience. So I always give the example, like over the summer, I was in ancient Mycenae. I'm looking at just like the ruins of Greece at the time of the Trojan War. And how cool would it have been to just turn on an augmented version of this where I could be immersed in the ancient city surrounded by people speaking ancient Greek and know what they're saying. That sounds really crazy, but I mean, essentially the moment that we've developed a performant visual prosthetic and a performant auditory prosthetic, everything I just described is trivial software engineering. And we're on that track. That's where the technology is going. So is it going to be the 3rd generation or the 8th generation device that does that? We'll see, but the field is inevitably moving there.
Good. I'm 71. By the time I hit the wall here in another decade or so, you guys got to get this on board.
I'll do my best.
Us baby boomers. And the baby boomers have all the money, so that's what you need, right? How much does it cost? How much funding do you need? I mean, are you looking for more VC?
It depends. I guess it depends how good you are. Our first device took us $120 million to develop. Neuralink developed a worse device and spent $500 or $600 million on it.
Whoa.
So there's room for economy, but in any case, I mean, it's not a trivial development project. They're very complex systems, and even just the testing that you need to go through in large animals and benchtop testing and the inventory that you have to produce to convince yourself that the first patient isn't going to be exposed to unnecessary risks. Like, that's a big thing. You need a large staff, because it's not just about building one thing that you think will work once. It's about building something that you think will work reliably for a lot of people safely.
Yes, well, I guess there'll be government regulations once you come online with all this stuff, I suppose. Well, that's right. You already need to get FDA approval for what you're doing.
Yeah. The good news is, I'll say that the FDA that we work with, the group that covers neurological devices, is a smart group of people. And it's interesting. I don't know whether out of self-interest or respect, but they were not heavily doged during the last year of government interactions. And they really care about what they do. Many of them are BCI scientists who trained in the same labs that people who are developing the technologies right now trained, and they could have gone anywhere. They could have made a lot more money, and they specifically went to the FDA because they felt that track was going to help them bring products to market, and that they had like a place in the ecosystem where they could help. They're like very impact oriented. They work nights and weekends to try to get things processed and keep things on time. I think not obviously every agency has its bureaucrats, but by and large, the people that we have interacted with in our group of FDA are really thoughtful scientists who care. So I can't, no complaints,
Nice.
No complaints.
Yeah. And the ethical considerations, what are some of the big issues looking forward? At the moment, you probably just have to deal with PETA and the animal rights people worried about your sheep. But you're going to encounter others that say, oh, you're playing God.
Yeah, I mean, there are positive and sort of negative aspects of BCI ethics. Like, one of the ethical imperatives is getting these technologies over the finish line so that patients can have access to them, and then making sure that they get paid for, and that, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurers, that they'll actually pay for the devices, and that this research doesn't just pile up on the other side of a wall and not see anything. Then there's, I think, I would say the medical ethics of BCI are not as contentious. I think there's a lot of stakeholder alignment on trying to roll this out quickly to areas with high unmet need. I think that when you start talking about immersive AR/VR experiences, sort of cognitive links with AI agents and sort of all the augmentative applications, people do start getting a little bit worried. I guess what I would say is that this has always been an interest of Silicon Valley. But the one thing we can say is that when people like Elon and Sam Altman and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates are pouring money right now into the BCI field, many of them with the goal of developing this next generation human technology integration. Like, this is one of the few examples where tech is producing massive positive externalities. Like the last generation of tech, apps and sort of like software that you don't pay for, but then you realize you're the product, getting pinged with notifications, like addictive scroll feeds. These were all products with huge numbers of negative externalities. But the effect of BCI right now is actually that in pursuit of building the ultimate AR/VR platform, we're curing blindness. In pursuit of, developing the AI assistant that lives in your head, we're curing deafness. In pursuit of being able to control, cool humanoid robotics and play sports, you can also help people who are paralyzed to go about their life and regain autonomy. So in some sense, there's this very nice alignment over the next 20 years where in pursuit of building these augmentative technologies, we're helping the most vulnerable people in society. Now, where is this going? I guess this is another potentially good thing, which is that many of the companies that are leading the charge, we're empirically the company with the highest data rate BCI right now. We're staffed by a lot of people from the medical device industry who fundamentally came here because they care and don't want to develop a technology that makes the human race less happy. And so, as long as the companies that are leading are doing it, are building the technologies thoughtfully, then I think we do have a bright future for BCI.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I always turn to Black Mirror when I want to know what the negative ethical consequences are of any future technology, because they always play it out. There was the episode where the wife got a brain chip and forget what her problem with chronic pain or something, but then all of a sudden she starts spouting these commercials to her family, she's a school teacher and so on. And they go, oh, well, that's part of the program. You can opt out by paying an extra $30 a month or whatever. And then, we can upgrade you to the platinum model level. But that's only $100 a month.
Yeah.
Obviously there'd be some regulations to stop that kind of thing from happening.
Of course. And one of the nice things about how, medical devices work right now is that the cost is primarily in the device itself, and then it's not a subscription model. But I'll tell you, it's complex because a lot of people were like, "Oh, subscription model is super bad. Definitely don't want to have that." After watching the Black Mirror episode, but there's also a place for prescription models and a place where it can actually align stakeholders, which is one of the other big issues with medical devices in general, not just BCI, is the issue of device abandonment. Companies will run clinical trials and then fail, or they'll get into the market, will sell 1,000 devices and then fail. And then what the hell happens with these devices that are out there in the wild? If you don't have any kind of recurring revenue stream associated with the devices, it can be very hard to get people to continue writing software updates or service them or do anything with them. And it's an easy situation to have them abandoned. On the other hand, if you had good coding where the devices can get reimbursed, there's a subscription model, not like a self-pay, but like a place where the insurance companies will continue to pay for a device that's been implanted. Then you can create a kind of secondary market for other companies to come along and provide support services to a device, even if the original manufacturer is defunct. And so, it's you really have to take a nuanced view of this and when you're thinking about, but the idea of a subscription model.
Well, Yeah, I mean, you have to get revenue somehow. I mean, you have the same problem the drug companies do. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars to bring a drug to market, and then they have to charge, or else, they can't make payroll. And you have 75 employees. What if you had 7,500 employees?
Exactly.
Your payroll would be massive.
You have to amortize. The drug companies have to amortize the costs of all the failed drugs to get to the one Ozempic. And that's kind of how the model works. Yeah.
Right. All right, Matt, before I let you go, just a couple lightning round big questions here, because you're a neuroscientist that I love these topics of the hard problem of consciousness. Is there a way to solve it using computers and your chips and so on, if we could kind of figure out all the pathways and how consciousness comes online?
I mean, from a materialist perspective, you would say, well, if I could record from every neuron in the brain simultaneously, I'd have a perfect snapshot, of what everyone was thinking all the time. Would that be a complete description of consciousness? I don't know. I mean, it's I think neuroscientists don't agree on exactly what constitutes consciousness. Is ChatGPT conscious? I don't think it is, but
no,
there might be someone who could make that argument.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I just looked it up. Anil Seth's paper documented at least 22 theories of consciousness to explain the hard problem. So that tells me we're not close.
Yeah, I think that we may all be walking around in robotic bodies with 200-year life expectancies.
But here's what your chip could do. Okay, so you put the chip in a bat brain and then connect it to my brain, and then I would know what it's like to be a bat. I'd be sitting there going with the goggles on. Oh, this is what it looks like. Or a dolphin, or a gorilla, or a whale, or whatever.
Pilot whales and dolphins and orcas have huge brains. I don't know what they need all of that brain power to think about. To my mind, their lives seem relatively simple, but maybe they're writing like really complex poetry or something.
Well, that's been the problem of trying to understand animal communications. We have no idea. Sagan made this point back in the 60s when he was a member of that group, the Order of the Dolphins, with John C. Lilly, which kind of fell apart when they started giving LSD to the dolphins. But that, in terms of communicating with extraterrestrial intelligences, we can't even communicate with our fellow mammals.
It's hard enough to communicate with each other.
But apparently these whales have these long, messages or whatever in their deep sounds that go on and on and on and can traverse like hundreds of miles underwater and so on.
Yeah.
Who knows what
I'm
that
sure
means.
Some people have done some interesting information theory to calculate like what is the max vocabulary, or like what is the max information transfer rate of whale song. That you could definitely bound that.
Yeah. What about volition, free will? Where do you stand on that with human brain?
I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of experiments that reportedly refute the idea of volition of free will, because you can know when someone is going to make a decision before they are consciously aware they've made the decision. But I'm not sure that proves. I'm not sure that puts the nail in the coffin of free will, so to speak. So I feel like that's something that is. It's definitely not empirically answered today, and I don't know. I'd have to think about whether it could be empirically answered. Like, is that fault? Like, is that a falsifiable? Does that fall within the domain of falsifiability? This idea of free will.
Yeah. Well, it's a conceptual problem. What do you mean by free? It's same thing with the hard problem of consciousness. What do you mean by consciousness? Well, what it's like to be something. How would I know what it's like to be somebody else? I don't even know what it's like to be you, and you're a fellow human, right? So, I don't know. These are difficult problems. So can we have an inner life without language? That's another one of these big questions. So some of your patients don't have language, but they certainly have an inner life.
Yeah, I think you can have an inner life without language. I think there are people who are nonverbal, but still interact with their families. I think that is possible.
Okay, microdosing with psychedelics and so on. Is this kind of a crude version of what you're doing to treat, say, PTSD or extreme depression?
I don't consider psychedelics and microdosing to sit outside of the realm of conventional pharmacology. I just see they're different psychoactive molecules. I think they were stigmatized for a long time wrongly, and they were thought about as being distinctly different from the world of pharmacology. And now I think it's gone the other direction where they're considered some sort of like special privileged class of drugs. I think they're just drugs. I think we should treat them the same way that we treat other brain active compounds.
Okay, last question. Star Trek's Data. Is he a person? If you built Data, if your company built Data, does he have rights?
Yeah, it's interesting, like, because you would say, like, I think you might say, like, okay, well, in first instance mode, no, he's just sort of like an android. But what if you took, like, do you know this construction, the ship of Theseus? Like, yeah. So, like, well, what if you just slowly replaced, like, yourself and replaced, like, up to your brain, and then you started replacing parts of your own brain with an android to the limit where you had eventually replaced all of your organic matter. And there was, like, if there's a continuity of self, like, would that constitute a person? I don't. It's another one of those things. Like, it's more of a question of, like, the technical definition of personhood than it is a technology question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wrote about the mind uploaders. I wrote a whole book about attempts to achieve immortality, not just through religion, but also the cryonics and the transhumanists and so on. So they kind of play through that thought experiment. We just replace every one of your neurons, like every night while you're sleeping, and eventually you just have a silicon brain. And you wouldn't even know it. You'd still be just you. I think that's correct. If there's a continuity of self from one moment to the next, then it's still you.
But it's interesting because, like, if you stepped into, like, a Star Trek transporter, and if the laws of physics demanded that there could only be one you, and it was your atoms that were being disassembled and reassembled on the other side, I think a lot of people would feel that there was, like, some continuity of self preserved. But if you found out, oh no, actually we just we transport you and then we toast the old you in an oven, like, they would feel really uncomfortable with that. Like, we just clone you and then toast the old you. Yeah. So there's this idea of continuity. And even the ancient Greeks, like Heraclitus, just said, like, no person steps into the same river twice. Like, some people just think there is no continuity of self. Like, we destroy our own consciousness, like, every moment. And so I find that kind of depressing. I don't like to think that, but there are deep questions there, which unfortunately I don't even know if a high data rate brain computer interface can answer them.
Well, let me ask Super Grok. Hang on, no. It seems to know everything. Now, that was my problem with the mind uploaders. So they copy your connectome and upload it to the cloud. But if you're still alive, that's just a copy of you up there, and it's leading a different life than you are now. Yeah. You're just like identical twins.
Also, so a lot of my friends work in the connectomics field, fixing tissue, sectioning it on an electron microscope, reconstructing it. And I personally think, like, in electrical engineering, there's this idea of a behavioral model. So sometimes there's a circuit, it does things. You actually don't know what's inside. It's kind of a black box. And so you can't write the circuit with transistors and capacitors and such, but you can have a mathematical function that describes the inputs and the outputs, and you can drop it in as a black box into the circuit. And so, like, I think similarly, if you wanted to, like, clone someone and upload them onto a computer, you'd be just as likely to be able to build a good behavioral model where if you strapped a camera and a microphone onto someone from birth and you recorded all their inputs and all their outputs, you could probably build a robust predictor of how they're going to respond in most situations. And so, like, if just having an online version of them that behaves a lot like them were sufficient to consider them uploaded, then you could probably already do that without sectioning their brain. And so I think, but it just doesn't feel like that would be them. It's more obvious to most people that wouldn't be them. But if they feel like their own brain is being mapped neuron by neuron, somehow I don't think it is rationally correct, but somehow it feels more like it's them.
this is why I didn't go into philosophy. These thought experiments take you down these pathways, and you end up like, come on, this is ridiculous. This can't be, like with the simulation, there's a greater than, 51% Bayesian probability we're living in a matrix because, the Copernican principle, we're not the only ones. There's somebody else out there. It's not likely we're first, so somebody's way ahead of us. Look what we've done, Moore's Law in 50 years, make it 50,000 years.
You have to calculate like a sensitivity analysis on those, because there are a lot of parameters that go into that 51%.
Exactly right.
The air bar is 50% or 51%.
Yes, exactly. Like the Drake equation.
Yes, exactly.
Most of the components we have no idea what to plug in there. So,
yes.
That's getting better. All right, Matt. Thanks a lot. Congratulations on your work. It's really important. I mean, thank you for doing this, and I hope you make it before us boomers hit the wall.
Okay, I'll do my best. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right.